And that's difficult. That requires a lot of reading and thinking and rereading and rethinking and refining, and your topic is going to be too broad or too narrow, or you're going to be pulled in different directions because of a few articles that you read that give you new ideas. So really, that, I think, in my mind, should start long before the quarter in which you're actually enrolling in senior project units, okay? And it can be a fun experience, too. Let us help you. That's what we're here for. In terms of the scope, I mean, you have the handouts of what, the senior project is like, but something I would like to add and emphasize is that you don't necessarily have to limit yourself to doing sort of a traditional 50-page research paper either. Any topic you do, of course, has to be approved by whichever advisor you're working with, but I've had plenty of students work with me who decided to do something completely different. For instance, I had one student, my very first year here, who wanted to create a study abroad program. He was inspired by the European Union class that he had taken with me, and he said, you know what, we have all of these study abroad programs here on campus, but we don't really have one that specifically sort of targets the EU as a whole. Yeah, you can go to London, you can go to Munich or whatever, but how about sort of having a rotating study abroad experience that targets the institutions of the EU and so on, right? So make a long story short, what he turned in at the end of his senior project was a proposal for a study abroad program, and I made him do all of the steps, including going to talk to the International Studies Office, getting and filling out the paperwork for risk assessment and insurance, and then coming up with guidelines as to what the admissions requirements for this program would be. He had to research funding opportunities for how this program would actually be realized if this were a real program. So he basically, from A to Z, set up an entire study abroad experience for Cal Poly students without actually implementing it, but he's still thinking about it. He's in Italy right now actually studying, and so it can be something different. It can be a project rather than a paper. I had another student do an actual experiment, an experimental design with a bunch of students on campus about the impact of gender on how presidential candidates are perceived by voters, right? And I mean, in the end, it still turned into sort of a paper, right? But most of the work that this student did was actually, going to the Human Subjects Committee on campus and submitting a proposal to do an experiment with live students, right? Not just pulling resources from the library. And then actually, talking to administrators on campus about getting lab space and setting up computers and setting up a fictitious website for students to view as part of the experiment, hiring undergraduates who would actually oversee much of the experiment. So, I mean, these are all things that I think this is truly where you can get a lifetime experience. These are things that, don't just think about this in terms of, oh, I'm going to sit in a library for 120 hours and sort of passively research. It can very well be a much more interactive and emphasis on active process. Now, there's nothing wrong with writing just a paper, right? And it's never just a paper. I mean, all the papers that I've seen in senior projects are really, really exciting, right? But allow yourself to also keep an open mind. Another student of mine worked on a campaign here in California and essentially sort of kept a journal of the campaign work that she was doing and then tied them back into some of the research, some of the literature that she'd been exposed to, some of the knowledge that she had gotten from political science classes. Right, so there's lots of examples of what you can do. Main thing is talk to your advisors ahead of time about it, right? And just don't underestimate how long this is going to take, right? Don't do that. That's the worst thing you can do, all right? So I think that's it from my end. We have Q&A later, but I'll turn it over for now to Dr. Linhardt.
Start late, start whenever you feel like it. Yeah, I'm going to echo a few of the main thoughts that people have already made, and then elaborate just a touch. Doing a 50-page paper, doing something that long is something most of you have never done, and it sounds really intimidating to most students because students think about a research paper as sort of this amorphous, ambiguous, undifferentiated blob. And I think a lot of students think, how am I going to write that much on one topic? What am I going to do? And that makes sense because you haven't done it before. It's not nearly as intimidating as it sounds. Once you get a plan in place, then you start to put structure into the paper. Once you come up with a plan, the paper turns into a series of individual steps that are very manageable, and it becomes far less intimidating, far more doable than it would be otherwise. So from my point of view, that's where starting early and talking to faculty members early really comes into play. In 10 weeks, you don't have time to come up with a plan and then execute the plan and not be really stressed and unhappy. So if you start talking to faculty members early, try to get an idea of what you might do. Brainstorm with faculty members. Talk to them about things that are interesting to you. Faculty members will help you come up with a plan. So when students come to me, from my point of view as an advisor for a senior project, the biggest part of my job is to help the student brainstorm to figure out something that they're really interested in and to come up with a question that deals with that topic that is actually doable and manageable. And by doable and manageable, I mean we can sit down and turn it into a plan that consists of smaller pieces that can all be done. Typically, students think in terms of topics. Here's a topic I'm thinking about doing. Most students don't have a very specific idea what they want to do when they first come in. And the first thing I always encourage students to do is to think about, well, what's interesting to you about that topic? And I'll encourage students to maybe go back and think about their classes, look through syllabi, look through class notes, whatever. Think about what aspects of this topic were really interesting to me. Why is this something that I think I want to work on some more? And typically, I'll just brainstorm with students. We'll meet a few times, go back and forth to try to get at some aspect of the topic that's really interesting to them, and to turn that into a question. Right? From my point of view, it's always got to follow from a question. So you're going to be asking some question about a topic that you're interested in learning more about, and the point of the paper is going to be all about answering that question. And this is one of the ways it becomes far less intimidating. When you've got a topic you're interested in but no question, you don't know what to do. You don't know where to go. But when you've got a question, then you come up with a plan, a series of things you're going to do to answer that question, and it all starts to fall into place. So again, I'll echo, start off early, talk to faculty members. If you've got a plan in place, I mean, if all you've done, at least from my point of view, if all you've done by the time you start the quarter when you're going to do the project is figured out your question and a plan for answering it, then the 10 weeks can be really easy, and it can be a good learning experience, and you can surprise yourself, and at the end of it, look back and go, wow, look what I did. It didn't seem like I was doing such a big project as I was working on it, but at the end, just by sort of executing this plan and doing a little bit at a time across the quarter, you wind up with a nice product. The flip side of that is, if you don't have a plan and you start late, you're going to flail around and get really stressed. You're going to go down sort of dead ends. You're going to waste time, and it's going to be the exact opposite of a good experience. It's going to be really stressful, and you'll wind up with a worse product at the end of it.